Hey guys, Tbull here. Today we're going to be breaking down the Tier 7 tech tree battleships. I'm going to give you my rankings. This is January 2022. We're just getting the year rolling, so it's kind of a state of the Tier 7 type of a video at this point in time. These and the damage per minute numbers in the background as we're doing a few prefaces here. Those will be, of course, to the builds that I have. So your mileage may vary a little bit. We'll show the builds for each ship as we're going through here. So you'll see how we're deriving these numbers. But that's my build's damage per minute. If you don't know how to do it, you take 60 seconds divided by the reload time, multiplied by the guns, number of guns, and then multiply that by the max damage per shell, AP, HE, whatever you're measuring. And then it's, of course, a theoretical number. I do also want to point out that if you compare these damage per minutes to the cruisers, cruisers are basically higher damage per minute ships. So if you like dealing damage, let's see you get good at some cruisers. That's going to be how you're going to be able to maximize your average damage per game. So, these of course are my opinions. I do like to get feedback from you guys. That's one of the reasons I make these videos. I like to hear what you guys agree with me on this and what you disagree with. Maybe I'm undervaluing a ship or thinking about it in the wrong way. But a lot of times you guys tend to think my lists are spot on. So I want to get the feedback from you guys there. Do need to point out that these Tier 7 battleships are quite, the tech tree ones at least, are quite well balanced. And you can really kind of do a coin flip on a lot of these. Because even my bottom, the 7th ranked ship here, I think is a pretty good ship. And the difference between it and the 1st ranked ship, not that great in terms of performance, at least in my opinion. So keep that in mind. Maybe your favorite will score a little bit lower on the list. Doesn't mean I hate the ship. All right. And I think that's all we need to really preface it by. So let's jump right in here. Number 7, Japanese battleship Amagi. Now, this was my first Tier 7 battleship in the game, so I do have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for it. And I've always enjoyed the Amagi. Like I said, I don't really disenjoy any of these tech tree Tier 7s. I think they're all pretty good. But when we're going to compare it to the other ones, we have to put something at the bottom of the pack, and Amagi is it. Mobility, kind of the main strength, but compared to some of the other ones, it's kind of gotten crept a little bit on that. Guns do hit relatively hard. Damage per minute, AP, shells, middle of the pack, so pretty good damage, but accuracy, wonky. You never know what you're going to get when you pull the trigger with these Japanese battleships. And unfortunately, after a couple of nerfs, not a lot of people are playing the Amagi, so the spreadsheet stats aren't changing that much, and that means this ship's just kind of stuck in limbo. Okay. Amagi, you do need to keep in mind, if you can get it in close range, it is actually a pretty good brawler. You do have a bit of a turtleback on there, and, you got the maneuverability and the hard-hitting guns close range. It can be quite dangerous, and the secondaries will actually chime in as well. I remember one of my first ever Baltimore games, the secondaries of the Amagi caught me by surprise and shredded me. So, Amagi, bottom of the pack, number 7. Number 6, French battleship Richelieu. Okay, now, this one, some great players that I've played with think this is one of their favorite ships in the game, so it doesn't surprise me if there's going to be some disagreement here. What it does great, mobility, it's a great flanking ship. It's got the nice sturdy armor profile, not when Yamato's shooting it, of course, but most battleships, if it's got nose in, it's going to be relatively protected. Vulnerable turret faces, flat turret surfaces, so if enemy ships are targeting your guns, you may find yourself unable to fire back, forced to turn yourself into basically a floating torpedo at that point in time. So what you want to do is angle your turrets in between shots. When you're on your reload, just kind of turn your turrets maybe 45 degrees from whatever is shooting at you. That will cause the shells to do far less damage and preserve your turrets. But Richelieu, damage per minute on the ship, lowest for AP on my builds, and second lowest with HE. So offensively, not the best. Get some goofy spreads on this thing, especially long range where you see a lot of people trying to play it. Not saying you can't put up some big damage with this thing, but it's just the guns aren't that strong on it. So overall, from a defensive / mobility standpoint, I think it's a pretty solid ship. Offensively, though, I just don't think its performance warrants a higher ranking on the list. So we got Richelieu, number 6. Number 5, Russian battleship, Vladivostok. It wouldn't surprise me if this one got the top ship last year. I didn't go back and check my rankings from there. But the Vlad, I still think, is a very powerful ship. The guns, how they program the guns on these things is like they're really wonky. I think outside of about 12 kilometers or so, you're going to have a hard time reliably hitting stuff. But closer than that, the closer you get to ships, the more accurate the guns. So what you want to do with the Vlad is get it as close as you safely can do. You don't want to force the issue. You don't want to get too far forward, especially if people might have access to your sides. Because if you get shot in the side in the Vlad, you die very rapidly. Okay, so it's relatively difficult to play, at least until you get the hang of angling and positioning with it. But once you get that down, survivability goes way up. Like the Richelieu, flat front turrets, vulnerable to incoming fire. You want to protect those turrets by angling them in between shots. But the damage output on this, much better. In fact, the AP damage on my builds, second at the tier for the tech tree ships. All right, and even the HE scores, that looks like it's the best on my build. So it's got the ability to protect itself, got the ability to deal the damage. It's just, does the game situation allow you to get it close enough to actually utilize that high damage shot output that you're capable of doing with the Vlad. So Vlad, I think, is a very fun ship. Like I say, it could definitely rank higher on your list. Wouldn't surprise me at all. But we got it slotted at number 5. Number 4, probably the biggest surprise on my list. Well, biggest or second biggest. We got a couple of surprises up here. Bismarck, though, buff, 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 buff. Every 6 months or so it gets a buff because it came out of the garage or out of the packaging as a garbage ship. It didn't work. The secondaries were worthless back then. And the accuracy, whew, no good. But they've buffed. First the secondaries. You know, they've added modules. They've increased the damage it can do. Made the secondary build actually viable. So we actually run Celiax and we lean hard into it with my my play style. It still can be a little bit challenging getting the Bismarck in range, but if you can do it, and this game we got in the background ends up being a crack, and we'll probably review this game in depth here coming up. But the Bismarck, much more capable, and I think the last buff that it took was like a significant boost to the actually 6-7%, something along those lines. So now the more I'm playing it, the more I'm like, these guns aren't that bad. Okay. Celiax back in the day, he couldn't see straight, he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, he's getting better. Alright, so Bismarck is creeping up the list. If you've been ignoring it for a while, maybe take it for another spin, because I think it is getting to be in a good place. Alright. Number 3, American Battleship. Formerly the worst played ship in the game back when it was launched. That was the potato magnet. Everybody space cadets back then. Back it up, put the controller down, leave the room, and go get a snack, then come back and shoot someone before the game ends. That was the typical game plan for the Iowa. You don't see them as much these days. You still see them fairly often, but not nearly as much. And when you're seeing them now, I find that they tend to be a little bit more well played. Still, it's kind of set up to be like a long range, damage dealer. I get that, but you still want to be menacing the opponents with your positioning, right? The further back you get, the less angles you have on everything. Basically, the cone of the space that the team in front of you, the red team that takes up, tightens up the further back you are, right? Does that make sense? So you're not getting access to any broadsides the further back you are, unless they're just making mistakes and pointing directly at you. So trying to get this ship into position, critical, but also difficult, because you have a seriously huge turn radius. You're slow. I mean, it's not as slow as the Kansas that's coming up, but the turn radius onerous, second only to the Vlad. Rudder shift really bad. Maybe I need to work on my build, whatever. But the mobility has always been kind of the limiting factor, which makes it tempting to just kind of drop the anchor and sit there when you spawn and control access to your sides by backing up. I get why people play the IO the way they do, but it just doesn't make it an effective ship. It's not worth playing if that's how you're going to try and do it. So very powerful, good accurate guns. You get high level sims on there. You can do a lot of damage with the Iowa, of course, but it's just making sure you as the player are using it correctly instead of just taking yourself out of position. So Iowa still strong. Some people might still rate this as the top. Not me. I got number 3. Number 2, probably the biggest surprise for me personally, Vanguard. What the heck is the Vanguard? You ain't seen this ship in years. But this one, when the game launched, the Citadel was actually bigger than the ship itself. Like, you could miss the ship and it would still blow up in one hit. That's how bad this thing was. Like the Bismarck, we've had buff, 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 buff. Okay. Still got the nice armor profile. The difficulty about the ship and why it still remains difficult is this. If you're nose in, you're very well protected in a lot of cases, right? I'm not saying you're immune to damage, but you're about as protected as any other battleship's going to be, right? But the guns, you got 8 guns, 4 of them in the front of the ship, 4 of them in the back, and to get the back ones in play, you need to expose yourself by de-angling, or presenting more broadside. You expose yourself enough that incoming shots from battleships will wreck you. So the challenge of the Vanguard is and always has been, when can we get those back guns safely into play? The answer is not always, okay? Do not always try and fire full salvos with the Vanguard. If you do, you're still going to get tossed around and sunk pretty quickly. Okay, you're not going to go down as quick as you did back in the day, but it's still going to be rapid. All right, so if we're looking for these opportunities, okay, the target that's threatening me just shot. Now I can swing those back guns into play and then close that angle right back up. If you can pull that sort of gameplay off, then you can get those full salvos off safely. But you need to be paying attention to the map. Got to have good game awareness and understand what the enemy that you're engaging with is currently doing. But that said, the damage output here, we got the highest AP damage at the tier. Again, that's going to be taken into account full salvos, so that's probably why it's so high, because it's not always safe to be doing those full salvos. But that said, the Vanguard definitely capable of pumping out the damage. So I always found it to be a challenging ship, but I've found it over the years that if you play it right, you can dominate the battleship that you're fighting in a 1v1 battle. You just got to be really doing it correctly. But it's gotten a lot of buffs. We got reload boosters. We got everything else that's made this ship even better. So I got it number 2, and like I said, I didn't expect to put this at number 2 until I sat down and really thought about it, replayed all the ships a few times, and saw what they're capable of. Might cover this Vanguard game in the future as well. We had a few good games out of the stock footage on this video here. And number 1, Kansas. Maybe controversial, maybe not. We got the 3rd highest damage output on the AP shells on my builds. Tanky, relatively tanky, not immune, but it's one of these weird big bottom American battleships that when you're shooting at them, it's kind of weird. You get these odd results that you might not be expecting. So I find it to be relatively well protected in terms of the armor scheme. Obviously, the main drawback is the anemic speed. 25 knots for a tier 7 battleship feels quite slow. We do have a good AA, 95% rating on this. Not quite as good as the Iowa, but still quite strong. And American battleships didn't have good AA ratings, so that becomes more and more valuable as time goes on. Kansas, I thought it was good initially. And even when it came out, I think I made a video asking, is this now the king of the tier 7 tech tree battleships? And I think my conclusion at that time was yes. Now it's taken another buff. We got to reload. It's still a long reload, 32.1 on mine, but it used to be like 36.5 or something like that. So they cut the reload down by a significant percentage, roughly 10, 15%, somewhere in that range. And the turret verse, pretty good. So we got these nice American guns. They don't hit quite as hard as the Iowa, but overall, we got 12 guns, 4 turrets, 3 guns per, 406. So we're capable of doing a lot of damage. And I actually run Lee usually on the Kansas because I find it to be inherently accurate enough that we can even focus on the heal build without really sacrificing much damage output at all. If you want to run Sims, you'll give up some heals, of course, but you're going to have really accurate high damage output battleship on your hands. So I think you got options in terms of how you want to set this up. If you do run Sims, just make sure we're not putting the flammable cannoneer in slot 1. That's an outmoded build. You shouldn't have that on your battleships in 2022 at this point in time. Too much high volume HE fire starters out there, okay? And these big American superstructures soak up the damage from those type of ships. So make sure we're not compounding that by making it easier to set these ships on fire. Okay, so the survivability, definitely the biggest challenge of this ship, but if you can keep it in a relevant position throughout the duration of the match, you should be able to be having a high impact on the said match. So that's my breakdown, guys. Like I said, I do want to hear from you guys in the comments. What do you think I got right? What do you think I missed? Okay, do you think I lost my marbles? That's definitely possible. A lot of time on the high seas can make you go a little bonkers. So if you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. We got lots of World of Warships, and it's coming all the time. Questions, comments, leave below. Love to hear from you guys, and we'll see y'all later. Peace.